Hello, and welcome to Libations and Lectionaries. I'm Reverend Jimmy Gaughan. You will likely notice that this episode was released on the afternoon of Saturday, September 22nd, rather than the morning of Thursday, September 20th, as originally scheduled. The explanation for this is simple. Hurricane Florence cast the state of North Carolina into chaos last weekend, and I've spent much of this week playing catch-up both at work and in my doctoral studies, thus meaning recording could not take place until the evening of Friday the 21st. However, I'm glad that the timing worked out the way it did, because I feel that this episode would have been incomplete without a certain acknowledgement. Today, the alumni of the Wake Forest University School of Divinity received word that the Reverend Dr. Gail R. O'Day, Dean of the Divinity School from 2010 until this past summer, had passed away this morning after a 3-year fight with brain cancer. She began as dean when my class entered in the fall of 2010, and that class, the class of 2013, was the first to spend its entire time at Wake Div with Dr. O'Day as our dean. Dean O'Day was one of the nation's and perhaps the world's preeminent scholars on the Gospel of John and the Johannine writings, authoring a number of books and commentaries, including the New Interpreter's Bible Commentary on the Gospel of John. One of the Johannine writings for which she had a significant amount of passion was The Revelation of John, a book on which she taught a class to me and a few other brave and possibly foolish souls in the spring of 2013. It was during that class that I learned that the key to beginning to understand Revelation is admitting that you have no idea what's going on in the first place. Dean O'Day inspired a great many parts of my ministry, and it is safe to say that this podcast is one of them. A few months after I graduated, as I was waiting in search and call for some church, any church, to reach out to me, I ran into her and had a brief conversation in which she reminded me that no matter what I ended up doing in ministry, I needed to remember to have fun. And Libations and Lectionaries is nothing if not having fun with ministry. And so, having spent last night discussing the Gospel of Mark and drinking whiskey with fellow Wake Div alumni Ted Wilkinson, John and Caitie Callaway, and of course my wife Caitie Smith, I felt it only appropriate to introduce that podcast with a mention of the scholar and minister who significantly influenced the way in which all 5 of us live out our calls. Thank you, Dean O'Day. We'll see you on the other side. Jesus took a little child and set him in the midst of them, and taking him in his arms, he said to them, "Whoever shall receive one of such little children in my name receives me, and whoever receives me receives not me, but him who sent me." Hello and welcome to Libations and Lectionaries. I'm Reverend Jimmy Gaughan, and joining me tonight, my wife, Reverend Caitie Smith, although she's had a heck of a week and may not chime in as much. I am also joined by 2 prior guests, Ted Wilkinson, the youth director, youth minister,
youth director,
youth guru at Peace United Church of Christ in Greensboro, North Carolina.
What's up, jerks?
Awesome. And joining us for the first time in person, Reverend Caitie Callaway, who is no longer in Baltimore and no longer at University Baptist Church of Baltimore. What are you doing now, Caitie?
I didn't say that. I'm wearing a shirt, yeah.
Edit.
There's no editing here.
I am the Minister of Spiritual Formation at First Baptist High Point.
And we are at Caitie's house in High Point.
Yep, right in the middle of all the action.
There's a 1-year-old and a German Shepherd here.
Both 1-year-olds.
That's enough action.
That's all the action you need.
We're surrounded by toys.
Mm-hmm. And of course, being back in God's country, that affords you the chance to go see a Clemson game from time to time.
Like last week.
Yeah, I was going to say, you just went down a little, before the storm.
We had our priorities straight. That was like the first thing we had planned.
Nice. So, mentioning the storm, you'll probably notice if you're listening to this that it is coming out a couple days late. we had a bit of a storm over the weekend in the Carolinas. Hurricane Florence made landfall about a week ago, and a lot of people in eastern North Carolina are still displaced. I'm not sure, but I think Jessica and Vanessa Stokes may still be displaced from their home in Wilmington. Jessica, you may recall, was on the podcast back in May when we talked about Pentecost. She and her wife live very close to the ocean in Wilmington, North Carolina, which was evacuated and was completely cut off by land for several days. I know that emergency services have finally been able to get in there. They have running water again. They have power again. But it's going to be a long, long recovery for the people on the coast. So, if you're inclined to make a charitable donation to an organization helping out, please do. And whatever you do, don't do something like send a bag full of used clothes. They're going to throw that away. You laugh, but people do it.
Oh, I'm sure.
As the director or a director at a nonprofit, ask what people need rather than just assuming.
Yeah.
Because nonprofits love it when people ask. Thanks.
And if you're not inclined to ask, send gift cards to like Sam's Club or gas stations because they can use that stuff very easily. Anyway, so tonight we're going to be talking about Mark, the 9th chapter, the 30th through 37th verses, a couple of moments when the disciples had no idea what to say, and we're going to be doing an around-the-world whiskey tasting. Woo! Yeah. And our first whiskey tonight...
We can all crash here, Caitie, right?
Yeah, come on in. We got a queen-size bed this time.
Okay, legit, the pours that I'm going to be doing will come out to about 1 drink total. Mm-hmm. Like, after all 5 are taken into account.
What Jimmy is saying is he doesn't want to waste his whiskey on us.
What I'm saying is that when you do a tasting, you're only supposed to taste it. You're not supposed to get completely blitzed.
Sure.
I have lots of whiskey. I am happy to share it with my friends. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, quite frankly, if he's going to buy any more, he's going to need to get rid of some. And he loves to buy whiskey. So,
or you do the type of tastings where
we'll do you a favor tonight, Caitie.
Where you get full sample, like full drinks, and then you sell them the whiskey after they've had a few samples.
So that actually sounds like a wine tasting that Caitie and I did in the town of Herman, Missouri, a couple years ago. We went to a winery, and they had 15 wines on their menu, and oh, by the way, you taste them all.
Oh, yeah.
During the $7 tasting.
There's a winery, there's a vineyard up in Elkin, North Carolina, called Ragapple Lassie. Now they charge for a tasting. But they had 12 wines.
Oh, my Lord.
Free tasting, you taste every wine.
That's sweet.
Now it's like
That's
literally
insane.
Yeah,
now
all sweet wine or
no. Listen, that's like my favorite vineyard around here. It's so good.
Yes, please pass me your Glencairn.
We need to take a journey up there. They've actually got a really quiet tasting room. I bet we could record an episode there.
Hey, I'm all for recording an episode on location where they make booze.
There we go.
Field trip.
All right, so the first whiskey we're going to be trying tonight is made by Crown Royal, Canadian whiskey. Crown Royal's way of making whiskey is that they make a bunch of different barrels out of different, what's known as mash bills, which means they're made of different types of grain, and they blend them together. But lately they've been doing some single barrel whiskeys. This one is called Bourbon Mash, because it is made using the same kind of mash bill as an American bourbon whiskey, which means at least 51% corn. They got in trouble for it because legally it can't be called bourbon if it's not made in the United States. Like, that's law. And somehow the ATF missed it when it went to be imported, and so it got through marked Bourbon Mash. So because it is heavy on corn, it will be sweeter than other whiskeys. I am going to recommend that we do this using a method called the Kentucky Chew, because it will allow you to taste all the flavors. So the first thing you want to do is just take a little tiny bit of whiskey in your mouth and let it kind of burn your tongue. Okay. So you probably didn't get too many tastes out of that.
There's a distinct taste of something that I can't put my finger on.
It tastes like Divinity School.
It tastes like
Thursday nights.
Wait, Thursday nights taste like Mexican food and beer.
until you get back, and then you're like, you know, it'd be great after a night of drinking whiskey.
That
At 2 in the morning. Oh.
All right, so the second drink you want to take a bigger drink, about half of what's left, and just kind of swish it around your mouth, let it coat your tongue. Look, I literally learned this from a member of the Beam family, as in the Jim Beam family.
I don't know why you thought I was laughing. Get your mind out of the gutter.
Oh, I didn't realize my mind was in the gutter. I thought my mind was in Kentucky somewhere.
She's gaslighting you, sweetheart.
We don't have any good examples of that these days, do we?
None at all.
If the assault was that serious, she would have reported it to the police, right?
Ooh. We're going down a dark path.
You mean like certain Supreme Court nominees did 30 years ago?
We've got 3 more whiskeys to get through.
4.
Not sharing this with church members.
All right, so did you notice any flavors that time?
It's that same. It's kind of not a minty, but there's a light lift to it.
Kind of like maybe not a basil, but a lemongrass.
Yeah,
maybe,
yeah, kind of like
and
that.
a little bit of vanilla flavor.
Yeah,
I was going to say vanilla or like a caramel.
So, and here's the interesting thing. Well, I was going to add a little bit of water to your whiskey, and that will expand some of the flavors.
Oh, whoops.
Oh, well.
I'll do
Caitie
it.
wants a whiskey. So all the flavors in whiskey come from the barrel it's in. You can't add anything to it unless you want to call it flavored whiskey and have it be like Fireball or some crap like that.
Hey, now.
Fireball is ass.
I had a former church member try to fight me because he told me that his favorite bourbon was Fireball. And I told him it is not bourbon.
It's definitely not
it's
bourbon,
not.
but I still like me a shot of Fireball every now and then.
Fireball is cheap Canadian whiskey that they dump a lot of cinnamon into.
There's memory attached to it.
Yes, I have great memories.
Really? Are there actual memories attached to it, or just like the idea of memories because you can't remember the memories?
I never drank this once. I don't remember what happened.
Okay. So next thing you want to do, and there's chemistry behind this.
So many things I could say right now.
Is add a couple drops of distilled water to your whiskey.
Nothing about a trip
Maybe.
to DC.
Nothing's coming.
I think there's too much water in there right now.
Uh-oh.
I feel like we need to be videotaping this because this is not interesting.
Well, I'll
for
just
people who
describe
listen.
what Jimmy's doing. So he just poured some of the water out of. There's a or was that?
It's a Maker's Mark bottle.
Maker's Mark bottle that he's filled with water, and there's a little like. It's supposed to. Isn't that a 1 ounce pour at the top? No.
Okay.
It's a metal little spout. Anyway, he had to pour some out of it, and now he's pouring into our glasses. So it kind of makes a light browned.
So the point of this, adding water to your whiskey, is that it actually makes a chemical change where it causes the ethanol to disperse and brings out the underlying flavors more.
Ethanol?
You realize that ethanol is in all booze, right?
I did not.
like
realize that.
like in gasoline. Ethanol.
Yeah,
Well, that
makes total sense now.
ethanol is just
Burns.
ethanol is grain alcohol. That's all it is. I mean,
Right.
All right, so finish it off.
I can definitely taste the lemongrass now, and I actually like it with the water better because it does not burn.
It actually tastes a little nutty with the water in it.
Yeah, I can taste that actually.
Yeah.
The nutty.
All right, so speaking of nutty, they went on from there and passed through Galilee, and he did not want anyone to know about it. Oh, Jesus and his secrecy.
Oh, Jesus.
Jesus Christ.
I'm going to try and open this up now.
So here we have Jesus in Galilee, where he's spent, most of his ministry at this point? Because he started in Capernaum, which is in Galilee, right? Or did he start in Caesarea Philippi? I don't remember. Yeah, I had Fred Horton for New Testament. So.
Same.
Suckers.
Yeah. So he's in Galilee. That's right. And they came to Capernaum during this story. Mm-hmm. And in the first part of the passage, he's talking about the Son of Man is going to be handed over and betrayed and killed. And then 3 days after being killed, he will rise again. And obviously, in retrospect, we get it. But his disciples did not. And they didn't ask.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
So if Jesus is saying that, so he did not want anyone to know he was passing through, and the explanation is the Son of Man will be betrayed by human hands, etc., etc. But if this is a prediction of his death, is he not wanting anyone to know that he's going through there because he'll get killed too soon?
That could be part of it, or it could just be that Jesus was having some introvert time.
Yeah. Or he'd be like, I don't have time for this nonsense. We gotta get to Jerusalem.
Right, well...
in a few more
this
chapters.
is more... he's got a couple chapters to Jerusalem.
I think that verse 32 is one of the most interesting verses in the book of Mark.
Okay.
The disciples, A, didn't understand, and B, were afraid to ask. It's like they knew that they were missing the point.
Yeah.
And they were embarrassed about it, which is a very human response.
Sure.
To knowing that you're missing the point. However, this sense of being afraid to ask, I think that's very significant. Especially given kind of the theme of secrecy throughout the book of Mark. I don't know. That's just kind of my take.
Yeah, it's also just an awkward subject, because I think in Mark Jesus only talked about this once before this passage, and for someone to be talking about their own death, or just like this weird general, the Son of Man will type passage, is an awkward subject for anyone to hear their friends say, much less if you're following him around Galilee. Like if Jimmy was to every time we went to the beach or something, he was like, I can't let anyone know I'm here because I'll be betrayed by the hands of man in 3 days. Eventually we would be like, Jimmy has some real problems. We need to get him some help. And in this day and age, that psychological help would involve leeches and bleeding, and so it probably wouldn't be great for anyone.
Well, that sounds fun. Let's bleed Jesus.
So maybe that's why they were. Maybe they were afraid to broach that subject because he's saying some weird stuff that makes them uncomfortable.
Right, and just a chapter before, in 8:27 through 33. Jesus says it's the whole "Who do you say that I am?" chapter.
Yeah. Right.
And Peter says finally,
"You are the Christ.
You're the Messiah."
Yeah.
But then Jesus says, "Yeah, I'm the Messiah, but this is what it means." And so I'm wondering if there's some sense of the disciples just being in denial that their category for Messiah is getting totally blown out of the water.
Oh, that could very well be, because everything we know about them, they expected the Messiah to come, chew bubblegum and kick Roman ass. And,
right, on a white horse.
He's all out of
exactly,
bubblegum.
And liberate them. And that was not on Jesus' agenda at all.
And 2,000 years later, we're still obsessed with the idea.
Yeah.
Right?
Ooh.
Ooh.
Yeah, I mean, you think about the artwork of Jesus the Conqueror, and it's like, where do you people get these ideas from? Are you? You're not drinking. You're not smoking weed. What are you doing?
They are projecting their own inadequacies.
That could very well be.
It's awkward.
Yeah.
Oh, and my wife is running away. Work phone call.
Uh-oh. I was wondering why she had two cell phones.
Yeah, one. She has 2 iPhones, one for herself and one for her work. I too have an iPhone that does not belong to me, but I did not bring it with me because I ain't on duty right now.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Nice.
So we've got. Remind me, does the Mark account of Peter proclaiming who Christ is also involve Peter getting told, "Get behind me, Satan"?
Yes.
Okay. So that could be part of it too. Ooh, the Glenlivet 12-year. That's a fine whiskey that your husband just brought out there, Caitie. So in the previous chapter, you've had Jesus like smacking Peter down vocally for daring to speak back to him. And granted, part of that was the fact that Jesus didn't want Peter distracting from the mission and getting up some wild hare. Not that Peter would ever get up a wild hare. No, not Peter. And so now, a chapter later, the disciples are like, man, if we say anything, we might get in trouble.
Yeah.
I hadn't thought about that. I, up to this point, had kind of vilified the disciples in this passage for being afraid to ask.
Yeah.
And the way I intend to approach this text on Sunday is to talk about a fear of questions being detrimental to our faith journeys.
Sure.
But that definitely brings in kind of a pastoral side that maybe there are some times when people have a good reason to be afraid of their questions.
Right, absolutely. But, that's when you have to question, was this a good reason to be afraid of the question?
Right.
Well, those are always answers you seem to get in hindsight, and it's a hard thing to, at the time,
Sure.
be like, this is definitely something you should push, or Jesus says a lot of crazy stuff. Maybe this is just one of those things he'll say, like, the meek shall inherit the earth, and whatever. We'll forget about that tomorrow.
And it's easy for us to look at this 2,000 years later and say that.
That is true.
Right.
And we weren't there. I mean,
we've got a lot of hindsight.
Yeah.
And also to consider the way in which this, text came about as a text to convince people that Jesus was a certain identity.
Right. Yeah. And, yeah. So, we're going to pause on the Gospel of Mark for a moment and go on to our next whiskey.
Oh, boy.
This is Bar on Whiskey, Wicklow Rare. If you look at the name of the whiskey company, it's spelled real weird because it's in Gaelic.
Oh, yeah.
This is Irish whiskey. Bar on Whiskey in Gaelic means above the water.
Okay.
The old Gaelic words, whiskey bethea, meaning the water of life. So, whiskey is literally the water of life, at
Amen
least
to
according
that.
to its name. This is an Irish blended whiskey. So, same tasting procedure as before?
All right. Little drop, then half, and then with water. Okay.
Correct.
Man, that one burned my eyes.
The interesting thing is, this is
one
actually a lower proof than the Crown
This
Royal.
one actually didn't burn me as badly as the other
It didn't burn my throat or like my tongue, but
You just got a...
for some reason I got a whiff of it in my eye.
It was probably just the way you tilted your Glencairn. It released a cloud of ethanol into your face.
That sounds much more violent than what I experienced.
All right. So now that your tongue has had a moment to adjust, have a drink.
I like this one. Is there honey in this?
Absolutely not.
No.
I mean, you might get that flavor from it.
Yeah.
Like I said,
Something sweet. There's a sweet flavor to it.
when you're
Can't place.
dealing with non-flavored whiskey, the entire flavor of it comes from the barrel it was aged in. Now, this particular whiskey is aged for 4 years in retired Woodford Reserve bourbon barrels. So when bourbon is aged, you only use the barrel once. You make a new barrel, you char the inside, you age it, and then you pass it on. This distillery in Ireland got their bourbon barrels from Woodford Reserve in Versailles, Kentucky, and they aged this whiskey in it for 4 years. Then they took it out of that and put it into Spanish Madeira casks that had aged Spanish Madeira fortified wine, and they left it in there for 6 months. So any flavor you're getting came from the Woodford Reserve barrels and the Madeira casks. And, there's probably a lot of flavor in both of those. So, let's add a little bit of water to it.
We're learning about a Kentucky chew. Oh, sorry, not over the soundboard. I'm so sorry.
That's all right. It didn't spill on the soundboard, so
That's
we're good. All right, so...
Well, we got 3 more whiskeys to do that with.
Which one was that?
That was a Bar on Whiskey Wicklow Rare Irish whiskey. You want some, John?
Whose is this?
That's my wife's, but she is on the phone with the shelter in Burlington, which happens on a fairly regular basis. That's the downfall of being the boss lady.
Makes sense. Thank you.
No problem. So, any other flavor observations after adding the water?
I forgot to pay attention.
You just drank the whiskey. That's all right. No shame in that. All right, Ted, how about you?
I enjoyed it. It's definitely, of the 2 whiskeys we have tried so far, it's definitely my favorite. I feel like this is, over the other one, this was definitely one I could just drink straight.
Sure.
Like maybe with one of those ice cubes that's a big ball that you have to pay like $5 for the mold or something for. But
I've got 4 of those in my freezer.
well, there we go.
We've done this at my place.
Do you have? Do you also have the whiskey glasses with the hole in or the fold in the side that you can put your lit cigar in?
No, I'm not that fancy. I have not smoked a
for your
cigar in years, dude. All right, let's get back to the text, shall we?
Okay.
So, we were talking about... What were we talking about? We were talking about the disciples not questioning Jesus for various reasons. So, it almost tells me this passage is like they were walking to Capernaum in silence, which had to have been awkward.
Well, except for the next verses where they're
where
they're talking amongst themselves and going like, "I think I'm the best." No,
Well,
which is a weird argument to have.
What happens so much these days?
That is true.
yeah.
Though it's more passive aggressive. I feel like not openly like, "Well, I'm better than you." More, like I love how you just don't care what people think. Like,
Oh, bless your heart.
Bless your heart. So here's the mental image I get from that. You've taken hikes with youth groups, right?
yes.
Hikes with youth groups, hikes with youth groups. Have you ever gotten to that point during the hike where it's just quiet, but you can hear like whispering behind you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
From Sasquatch or from
No, from the youth, like whispering angrily at one another.
When we get to that point, I hike ahead.
I feel like that's what was going on here. Jesus was hiking
you hear
ahead,
scream, you're wrong.
and the youth group was whispering angrily behind him.
Does he still come by?
Yeah.
Okay.
What's up?
Sorry, my fiance might be coming by.
Okay.
We'll have yet another guest.
And your fiance is a double PK, so
Yeah,
she probably has some insights
that is
too.
true.
I've got more microphones. We need it.
I don't have any more microphone inputs. I am out of XLR plugs on this board.
Lucky for you, we've got another board.
Oh, fancy. So, back to the text.
Okay.
So what were you arguing about on the way? Again, silence. Mm-hmm. Again, you asked the youth group, what were you guys arguing about?
Right. Nothing.
Nothing.
Nothing. You
Sure.
think it just like kids, you'd think at some point they realize they already know once they ask what you're arguing about. There's not
Right.
Well, yeah.
The silence says it all.
Yeah, exactly.
We were arguing about who's best, Jesus, which...
I guess they are trapped because they can't lie outright. Otherwise, they've already said at that point they're no longer the best.
Right.
So to win their own argument,
But they never
That's a
admit
good
that
point.
they did it.
yeah,
They never admit that they did it.
Right.
that is true.
And, I honestly, and like I said, looking at this from 2,000 years later, it's easy to say things like this. But you see how many times Jesus lectures the disciples in one way or another, and it's like, he who has ears to hear, guys, come on.
Come on.
And like I said, again, easy to say that
Yeah,
2,000
in
years
hindsight.
later. But, I don't know, these guys walked around the country with Jesus for 3 years. I think at some point they would have gotten it. Although, I mean... Judas denies him, or betrays him. Peter denies him. They all run away.
Though that was in, like, I understand more
That was
the
in a
passion-
moment of crisis.
That was
I
in
get
a
it.
moment of crisis where their lives are on the line. This is like, oh, I'm being embarrassed. Also, we're all doing it, so we're all guilty together.
Right.
Like, it's not, it's we'll all look bad, so it's, only Jesus will be judging us.
Only God can judge me. Well, let me take care of that for you. Yeah. But at the same time, though, one of the commentaries in Feasting on the Word invokes Ecclesiastes. There's a time for silence and a time to speak. And these guys would have known this. I'm a little surprised none of them pulled it out of their back pocket. At which point Jesus would have been like, oh, I see how we're playing now.
It hasn't gone well for folks that quoted scripture to Jesus.
Like the devil. Didn't go well for Satan.
But
No, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say that this must be becoming a problem, or Jesus sees it might be becoming a problem, because he actively takes steps to stop it when he calls them all together when they stop for the night.
Right.
So we could, in our heads, it's like idly like, well, let's all count up our, demerits. How much is a lie? It's like the episode of The Good Place where they're like, so you were
Sure.
Did anyone watch that show?
I watched the first season. I keep meaning to watch the second season.
You should. It's very good.
Look, I just started Brooklyn Nine-Nine. It might be a while till I get to season 2 of The Good Place.
Well, The Good Place is still on the air, and season 2 just dropped on Netflix.
Well, Brooklyn Nine-Nine is still on the air, too.
Looks like we're jumping to the plug section already.
But The Wire is the best of all of these shows. Because it's real.
The Wire.
Yeah, there's The Wire, The Good Place.
I don't know any of these shows you're talking about.
Really? The Good Place.
The Good Place is slightly more escapist fantasy than The Wire.
Well, just a little bit. It's also a comedy.
It's got 100% more Kristen Bell and Ted Danson, and 100% less drug-fueled gang wars.
Got it.
There is just to give a brief summary, Kristen Bell is a woman who wakes up after she had died in The Good Place, which Ted Danson is sort of an angel, and she comes to it, but she's not the person he thinks she is.
Yeah. She's not supposed to be in The Good Place.
She's actually just like a really rude person that has been confused with someone else with the same name, and so she's trying to con her way into staying in The Good Place.
And not just a bad person, but a bad person from Phoenix.
That's right.
When they brought that up in the first episode, I was like, you guys are a-holes.
Like, the fact that she's from Phoenix means she shouldn't even be here.
She should be where it's hot.
Yeah, exactly.
That's right. That's right. We're already used to it.
Exactly.
So this changes directions just a little bit, but I wonder if the two are related. The beginning where the disciples are afraid to ask, and then them totally missing the point and arguing about who is the greatest.
It could. That's... Yeah.
I wonder if there's a failure of discipleship there. And I'm saying that because that's my position, and that's what I look for in life.
Oh, hey, why not?
But I wonder if the fact that they were afraid to ask questions maybe was maybe an illustration of that is that they were totally off base and arguing about who was the greatest.
Sure. That could well be. All right, so let's try another whiskey. Next whiskey that we're going to go with is Hibiki Japanese Harmony whiskey. It comes from the Suntory Distillery, which is one half of the parent company that owns Jim Beam and Maker's Mark. Beam Suntory is the company, but so this is made out of the same mash bills and barrels that they use to make their 17 and 21-year-old whiskeys. And the whole reason for Japanese whiskey is that... Shoot.
Okay. It's loose. The metal spout is loose, folks. Luckily, we did not have a horrible spill.
No, we did not. Back when the British Navy and British explorers first went to Japan, they took a bunch of scotch with them. And the Japanese people, it turned out, really liked scotch. And after World War II, they were looking for something to establish a new and different part of their national identity. And so they started making whiskey. And Suntory was the first, it is the oldest Japanese whiskey distillery. And I would say the best, personally. So, not so much with the Suntory, huh?
This smells
I'm not
very
going to drink
smooth.
the whole thing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, it was just it's a half ounce.
Well, we
pour.
we're doing a Kentucky Chew to taste all these.
That's right.
So, ooh, that's super smooth.
And it has a lot more wood notes to it.
Yeah. It's got a
Than the other
bite
ones.
on the end of it.
It does have a bit of a bite on it. I'm going to take a bigger mouthful.
Okay.
See how it goes.
Let's do that.
That's what she said.
And that was how I got Japanese whiskey up my nose.
Jimmy
Jimmy does not edit a lot.
No.
Oh, no.
I already said I'm not sharing this one with church members.
Editing takes the fun out of it, although I will be editing this one because there's a lot of dead space to it. So, let's add a little bit of water to this.
What kind of water is that, Jimmy?
It's just distilled water.
Vodka water.
It's in a small Maker's Mark bottle, but it is
Nothing
just
brings
water.
out the flavors of whiskey better than other alcohol.
Yes, because that's... hey, look, vodka and bourbon, I mean potatoes and corn.
Right. It's like the Midwest major food groups.
You gotta smell it. You gotta take it in. You can't just take it all down.
Not a wine.
I really like the way that tastes with the water added to it.
Yeah. I guess that makes sense because they would... Isn't there, like, you can order, when you order whiskey straight, you can ask for water? And,
you can ask it, you can order it neat, that's with nothing in it. You can order it with a water back, which they don't put anything in it, they bring you the water with it. You can order it on the rocks, so they'll put it on ice. And I like getting it on the rocks, personally, because over the duration of you drinking the whiskey, it will melt the ice and the water will open it up and it will cool down, like both physically cool the whiskey and it will chill the ethanol, which will prevent it from blowing up into your face. So
He said, physically cool it down, but what he was also referring to was spiritually cool it down.
yes, we are cool. We are cooling the spirits. Lord help.
You're welcome.
That was something. So,
You've missed me.
So how'd your fantasy football teams do the first couple weeks?
In our league, I'm 2-0.
Nice.
I'm 1-1.
I'm 1-1 as well.
Yeah, I think everyone is except for one person. Can't remember. Welcome back to Fantasy Talk. Where we talk fantasy all the time.
I got a huge game out of Jarvis Landry last night.
Yeah.
The Cleveland Browns winning a game. Yeah.
Finally. It only took 2 years, but they did it.
Now, if only the Cardinals would win a game, because I'm not okay with the Cleveland Browns being so much better than the Cardinals. But I digress. So, the disciples have been arguing. Jesus is shut down their arguing. And then Jesus grabs a random kid.
Don't stop there. Do not stop there.
That's a fun place to stop, though.
Too soon, Jimmy. Too soon.
I was only trying to go so far with the joke there.
Well, obviously you didn't have to try to go any further.
Apparently, y'all took it the rest of the way. Anyway, so there's apparently a kid with him, a little child. Might be one of the disciples' kids. We don't know enough about the disciples to know if they had
maybe
kids.
it was his.
Or maybe it was Jesus' kid. What?
Where'd you get that from? The Dan Brown book on your bookshelf?
It's all a conspiracy.
Okay, Tom Hanks. Calm down.
I have a horrible haircut, and I'm in the Vatican.
You do. That's why I said
Oh, you legit have the Da Vinci Code over there?
Oh, boy.
Well, I see Deception Point, which...
Angels and Demons is right there.
See, the only one of his books I liked was Deception Point, because it wasn't about anything spiritual. It was about the NSA.
I enjoyed... granted, I read it on a train when I was very bored, but I enjoyed the Da Vinci Code, except for one chapter in the middle, where it's just... Anyone who's taken any intro to Christianity course knows that it's entirely lies about there was plenty of paper. Why didn't Jesus just write his own gospel and blah, 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 and this long list of things. It's like, well, there's a lot of reasonable explanations for these. And I know this is the premise of your book, Dan Brown, and you need to put on these weird
Because
questions.
books were not for religious people.
What?
Right?
And yet we must critique them.
Yeah.
Yeah, we must critique them so that religious people don't read them.
Yeah.
That and Harry Potter.
Look, Harry
Infiltrating our kids' minds.
J.K. Rowling is so much better a writer than Dan Brown is, okay?
That's true.
Yes, but you're comparing apples and oranges.
So, what's your point? We're drinking 5 different kinds of whiskey here all around the world. I'll compare apples and oranges all day.
On a computer.
So, back to Jesus
Touching the children.
not touching the children. He took a little child and put it among them, and taking it in his arms, he said to them, "Whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me welcomes not me, but the one who sent me. I am the walrus. Goo goo ka-choo."
So I have a question about the series of events that happens in this scene. Now, I know that the Gospels are kind of just like, we have limited amount of paper, and also if Mark is actually writing this somehow, it's him in his old age trying to remember this.
Not to mention which Mark was not particularly inclined to go into detail.
No, and so he sat the 12 down and said to them, "Whoever wants to be first must be last, and of all, and a servant of all." And then he took a little child, put it among them, and then taking to his arms. So does he bring the child into the group, sit back down in the seat, then pick up the child?
I don't know, Ted.
Is he bringing the child into the 12? Like, was it 11 at this point, and this child now makes 12?
Ooh. Oh, I like that.
And
that's
he's
an
like,
interesting theory.
Whoever's house we're staying at, your 5-year-old son, is now an apostle. He's coming with us.
Ooh, is he kidnapping?
Is it like a weird draft? Like,
Is it a fantasy draft?
is it a
Oh, did you see the Celebrity Pastor Fantasy
Yes.
Draft? Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
All white men.
Oh, of course. And I think the guy who did that was trying to make a point.
Yeah.
Anyway, I don't know.
Well, then why are we
really
here
don't.
if you don't?
Because we are here because we don't know, Ted. That's
Fair
the
enough.
entire reason for studying and preaching these texts.
So, okay, here's my wild idea
Okay.
about the kid. Mm-hmm. Jesus had it with the disciples not wanting to ask questions, or asking the wrong questions, maybe, with the who is the greatest thing. And he brings this little kid in as an illustration of, what they should be. Mm-hmm. And so thinking about, faith as a child, whatever, all that stuff that, we're told as kids and all that stuff. The two things that I think of when I think of children and what they exemplify for adults in faith, one is vulnerability and the other is wonder.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm wondering if there's something to this. The disciples obviously did not have vulnerability nor wonder when they were afraid to ask questions of Jesus when he was talking about his eventual demise.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if he's raising up qualities such as vulnerability and wonder.
That could well be, because a kid is going to ask questions.
Right.
Yeah.
The Son of Man will be handed over and betrayed and killed. Why?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So, and yeah, that's a great point, trying to teach them to be more like a child.
Yep. And I also, I think there's, and I haven't worked this out yet, but I think there's a message here about inherited faith as well. Because I don't think the disciples could quite grasp the idea of the Messiah because of their inherited faith.
Okay.
But there's also at play this kind of raw faith of a child that inevitably is going to be inherited, but is enhanced by these qualities of vulnerability and wonder.
Sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and pointing out that it was a little child kind of indicates that it's not a kid who, say, has been through his bar mitzvah yet.
Yeah.
Where he would have learned all these things about the inherited faith. So he doesn't know, or she doesn't know these things yet.
Blank slate.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I like that idea.
So, I got on a Abraham Joshua Heschel kick this week.
Mm-hmm.
We saw.
Yes.
We also saw Neil Wall's epic
Call
takedown
out.
of you.
Yes. Yes. Things that I obviously was not good at as a 21-year-old first-year student reading my syllabus.
I don't seem to recall Heschel being required reading for Old Testament. I think
Yeah.
it was optional.
It might have been
definitely
optional.
was.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm gonna take a
AKA
picture. I'm gonna find my syllabus this week, take a picture of it, and post it on Neil Walls' wall.
I'm almost certain it was optional.
So, okay,
Otherwise, we would have read it, right, guys? Because we
Right.
always did the assigned reading.
I read every page of my assigned reading in seminary.
All
So-
1,000 pages every single day. Tupper assigned. Yes.
So Heschel has this quote that's pretty awesome. He says, no, wait, that's not the one I wanted. Sorry. You can edit that part out.
Okie dokie.
He says, indifference to the sublime wonder of living is the root of sin. Indifference to the sublime wonder of living is the root of sin.
Mm-hmm. So, extrapolating that, we can assume that the disciples were actively sinning
Living in sin.
by refusing to live in wonder.
Yeah. And I think he was bringing this child into the fold to encourage them to wonder again. Which there's a vulnerability that goes into wonder, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Is that your cheat book?
That's my cheat
That's
book.
his cheat book.
It's got all the answers in it.
Anybody else want to try the next whiskey?
Do you want some?
I'll try it.
It's bourbon.
You'll try mine.
So.
Okay.
Ted, did you have a point you wanted to make?
Yeah, so when I was reading a word pictures in the New Testament, which is by the cover, literally deteriorated when I was studying this for today. So Archibald Thomas Robertson. Anyway, that's the one of the commentaries I was working with. He brings up. I kept reading into the next passage, into 38 and 39, where John is talking about the people who are curing spirits and stuff in Jesus' name, but they're not actually followers of Jesus. And
the disciples get all bent out of shape.
yeah,
about
exactly.
It, you know.
And Robertson was talking here about that. Like John is evidently trying to change the subject because he's embarrassed about being caught talking about how great he is or how great everyone is. And he has this interesting line I highlighted. One needs to know the difference between loyalty to Jesus and sticking over one's own narrow prejudices. And I think that comes into play with the child because their own prejudice against the concept that someone outside their group can be using Jesus' name would play into that whole, like, they're like, well, this is us and that's them. Whereas Jesus is saying to a child, like the child is a lot more open-minded, is a lot more accepting on that same branch.
Well, and that's a problem that has not gone away.
No.
We still see churches trying to exclude people who they claim are not coming in Jesus' name, even though, just because you have a different idea of what that means doesn't mean you're wrong.
Right.
All right, so next up, American Bourbon Whiskey.
Is good.
This is Michter's Old No. 1 bourbon. Michter's is the oldest, not oldest continuously operating, but oldest existing distillery in the United States. It's founded in 1759. And, they make Kentucky bourbon whiskey. Let's give it a shot.
I'd say that tastes like Divinity School, but it tastes a lot more expensive than
If we raided someone's liquor cabinet.
Well, if by tasted like Divinity School, you're talking about like a $12 bottle of Jim Beam White Label, sure.
This, so it's interesting. I really like the flavor, and then it felt like my tongue was going numb.
That's interesting.
I was like,
I mean, it's, well, it is 92 proof, so it's the strongest one we've had
That's
yet.
it?
That's it. But it is the strongest of the whiskeys we've had yet. Did you notice like a very heavy caramel scent to it?
Yeah.
That was
A little
definitely
bit of a
noticeable.
caramel taste. It definitely has a sweetness to it.
Yeah, and all bourbon does because it has so much corn in it. This one especially is something like 70% corn.
Yeah.
So, we get high fructose corn syrup from corn, right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
So this is much better for you than high fructose corn syrup, and tastier as well.
But is it better for us?
Whiskey Betea,
Yeah, exactly.
water of life.
I'll drink to that.
Yeah, I like this stuff personally.
They're saying that's, sting in my mouth in a weird way.
Like I said,
I might be allergic to something that's in
also,
this whiskey.
Ted, that's what she said, Ted.
Also, what she said.
No, like I said, this is the highest proof whiskey we've had yet, which, the higher the alcohol content, the more it's going to sting.
True. It's just in a weird way I'm not used to. Maybe it's because it's higher quality, but...
So the caramel really came out with the water.
Yes, agreed.
Yeah.
And Ted, if you think this stings, I had thought about bringing a couple of barrel-proof whiskeys and then decided I didn't want to scorch your noses. So,
Sorry, my eye already got burned from the Japanese whiskey.
Yeah.
So,
Oh. Someone's,
oh dear God, it's moonshine.
Like real moonshine or the kind you get in the stores?
That's just store moonshine.
That's legal.
the legal one.
See,
Although,
I kind of take issue with calling anything legal moonshine.
yeah.
Yeah,
sure.
I agree.
However,
It's true.
maybe we should do a show where we try to actually get some real moonshine.
I can hook you up.
Yeah, I was going to say, I know where we can
need
get
to
some real
of that
moonshine.
apple
Yeah.
moonshine.
We
I've
could
got,
do it.
I've got a family
Ooh,
hookup.
I
we
got
could do,
some
We
from-
could also do a show where we make our own alcohol
See,
and then come together.
see,
at that.
no,
I
sell it.
Tad,
I have a beer
Tad,
making
In our
kit.
cars.
Yeah.
Driving around.
Tad,
Wake Forest.
In an RV.
I like this.
all right, so
Finally, I'll pay those student loans off.
so apparently Libations and Lectionaries is about to turn into Breaking Bad Divinity School Edition. Ted, I'm a Navy officer. I can't be involved in such shenanigans.
Jimmy? What Jimmy? We never saw him.
Yeah.
Who's Jimmy?
He's
I don't know
driving
who's
the
that
RV.
jumping the fence over there. Ah.
Yeah, right. I'll drive the RV around. I don't want to drive an RV around
No,
the Wake
it's-
Forest
it's
campus. I'd be like,
No,
That
it's
won't be
like
conspicuous.
I used to drive a minivan.
it's like we're the Millers, and we could just put in the RV tanks. We could put the moonshine, and it'll
dear
come
Lord.
out the sink.
Perfect. So it's
Last name Ticklebell.
or it's like, why are you emptying that RV's tank in the middle of the campus? Shitter's full. So anyway, let's finish up talking about the text, shall we? Whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me welcomes not me, but the one who sent me. That verse is something else. I mean, it's like word. I don't know how to describe it. It's like a bunch of word pasta taken and thrown at the wall.
Yeah.
Something needs to be said about welcoming a child, though. I mean,
Sure.
obviously, given today's news, not today in particular, but today
But
in general,
The news of the last few months,
Yeah.
perhaps.
obviously, welcoming a child is not the most easy thing to understand what it entails. Maybe it is, and maybe we're just stupid.
I think welcoming a child does not entail detaining them in a closed Walmart.
Well, yes, that's what I'm alluding to. But I do think that there is some serious critical thinking that has to go into. Well, there's no critical thinking that is
Right,
required.
this is-
you just welcome a
this
child.
should be simple. You know,
Yeah.
you treat a child as a child and not a criminal.
It's not a trick question.
Right.
This one.
Right. Yes. I wonder though. Well, that's another conversation.
Sure. And, I mean, the disciples apparently had to be told this. You know, and I don't know. Maybe it wasn't as common sense back then. Maybe, given the rate of infant and child mortality, it's entirely possible that they did not look at their children the same way we do now.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, children were not socially valuable,
Right.
for any reason, and to think about welcoming somebody who has absolutely no social value. That's
It's countercultural, revolutionary,
well, yeah. Those are a few words,
things Jesus did.
right? But even like in church today, not every church is incredibly welcoming to children.
That's very true. I mean, that's how I ended up in the Disciples of Christ tradition. I was born and baptized in the Roman Catholic Church, but when my parents moved to Phoenix and went to the neighborhood parish, the first Sunday that they were there, my mom was getting dirty looks from old ladies for having me in church at 1.5 years old.
And they ended up going to the congregation that 30 years later ordained me. So
I was told that Sophie could participate in helping our family light the Christ candle on Christmas Eve, if she was well behaved.
Define well behaved, though.
She was 6 months old. Of all nights, for a child to be welcome into a service regardless of the circumstances.
Christmas Eve is the night.
Right.
Not in our current context.
No, this was not in our current context.
This was at the other place. The previous place.
The only place where Sophie was for a Christmas in her 1 year of life.
Yeah. No, she'll be in North Carolina this year, which is better.
Indeed.
I was going to go back. Can I jump back for a second?
Please do.
To the passage, whoever wants to be first must be last and servant of all. Obviously, addressing their claims of who is the best, who is the leader, or whatever. But I'm always curious why it seems like a good rule of thumb that the leader, let's say the leader of the country, should consider themselves a servant of all, and that makes for good, humble leaders. Why do we not do that ever? I would say anymore, but I honestly can't think of one where I'm like, yeah, we all thought like, hey, this person would make a great, like, talks about serving everybody.
I don't know. I think certain previous leader of a certain country who served from perhaps 2009 to 2017 may have actually been pretty good at that.
Or Jimmy Carter.
Oh God, yes, Jimmy Carter for sure. Probably,
I think,
Who is Baptist, by the way?
Who still is Baptist?
Yeah, you know what I mean. Just saying.
Yep.
We're not all crazy.
No.
He led
He leads weekly Sunday school at his church.
What was the revivalist whose name I forget? There was Billy Graham. He led Billy Graham revivals.
Really?
Yeah,
because,
but he's one of the few presidents that Billy Graham did not have an active participation in his administration.
Sure,
partly because he got super criticized for being a part of Nixon and Ford's administration.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, and Billy Graham. It's important to remember Billy was not his son.
Yeah.
But that's for another time. First she'll be last and servant of all.
Yeah.
So, just jumping in, and I missed 20 minutes because I popped out for a second.
You were doing work? That's
No, I wasn't. It was Dad.
Oh, it was your dad? Oh, gosh. I thought it was the shelter. I thought you were off being boss lady.
No, I was not being boss lady.
Okay.
Don't jinx it.
Knocking on wood.
No, I mean, have y'all talked about... So, what I'm hearing in everything that's being said is it's a counter definition of masculinity. And this is also coming from things I've been reading lately about how the world is off kilter because we've only got this one definition of masculinity functioning, and masculinity does not have to be toxic. But the first shall be last and the last shall be first. I mean, toxic masculinity. I mean, there are a few things I feel like really encapsulate what toxic masculinity is, but completely counter to that idea. And then listening and being vulnerable and still being interested in learning and not being so invested in certitude, the way the disciples were. They wanted to act like they knew everything. There was this.
Did you hear everything I just said?
No, I didn't.
No.
Did you just say that?
No, this is awesome. I'm so glad. Yes.
No, I was not eavesdropping.
No, you were seriously eavesdropping, I bet. No, I'm just kidding. Awesome.
Hey, look.
No, I'm glad because
the spirit's on the move.
I feel like there's something to that, and I feel like it takes a woman's perspective to see the emphasis that Jesus is putting on vulnerability, on recognizing the limits of our knowledge and celebrating that, and celebrating the idea of wonder.
Well, and the good news is, of all the ministers in this room, the one that's going to be preaching on it on Sunday is a woman.
Yeah, I still have to write the sermon.
Well, I won't be.
About what, 48 hours? Yeah. Good.
Yeah, I won't be preaching on Sunday. Ted?
I will be
Preaching
doing
to
a
the
very
little
short
children.
children's sermon and then entirely revamping the way I do Sunday school.
Hey, there you go.
Hooray.
Caitie won't be preaching on Sunday. John, if you're Katie's preaching on Sunday, that means you're not.
I'm doing the children's sermon as well.
Hey, there you go.
Oh.
Waiting to read the sermon to
to make it tie in. Sure, that makes sense. So, speaking of the first being last, let's go with our last whiskey, which comes from the first place that made whiskey, Scotland. This is the best of the whiskeys that I brought. So another first shall be last. This is the Macallan single malt, 12-year-old, double casked. Again, this was aged in bourbon and sherry casks. So they don't specify, with the exception of one line of their whiskey, they never specify which distillery the bourbon casks come from. There's one line, the Maker's Edition, that they aged in Maker's Mark barrels, as you might expect. But this is not an Isle of Ely whiskey. It is not peated, so it does not have the smoky flavor that is so often associated with Scotch. This is a very smooth and gentle whiskey, and it is delicious.
Sounds like a lover.
I've never had a whiskey described to me as gentle. They're not gentle normally the next morning.
Well, you see, that's why you don't get blitzed on whiskey.
Jimmy, it doesn't take me
It
getting blitzed
will make you
anymore
a bunch
to
of promises
feel
at
blitzed
night
in
and
the
then just
morning.
leave in the morning before you wake up.
That's true. It sucks to get old, doesn't it? Anybody else for Macallan 12-year?
Just going to point out that everybody in this room is either married or engaged. Ted.
Y'all, this smells awesome. It smells like French toast.
Yeah, it does.
What kind of French toast are y'all eating?
Scotch.
With whiskey on top. Poured on top instead of
That
syrup.
sounds like a Pauline recipe.
There you
Take
go.
your reduced whiskey glaze on top of your French toast.
How much butter is in that reduced whiskey glaze?
Good God, that is
About
good.
5 pounds.
Wow. Make it good.
Yeah, exactly.
That is definitely
good.
the whatever of life that we talked about at the
The
beginning.
water of life.
The water of life.
And a lot of people would consider it heresy to put water
No.
in
we're
Macallan.
not doing it.
Are you don't want water
I'm
in your
not doing
Macallan?
it.
All right.
I'm not doing it.
All right. Fair enough.
Man, that's good.
Ooh, that does open up a lot of flavors, though.
All right, you
Sure.
convinced me.
I sold it.
It's going to make your tongue numb. That's fair.
The sound of a good whiskey.
Oh man, that's some good stuff.
Reminds me of my days in Edinburgh. It's good times.
In Edinburgh, the Macallan is much cheaper than it is in the
Little
United
bit.
States too.
In fact, they do a demonstration to show you can get it through the airport, and the salesman takes a bottle and slams it on the counter, and it doesn't break.
That's
And
impressive.
then people buy it.
I mean,
Don't try it with yours.
Don't get me wrong. This looks like a hefty bottle, but
Yeah.
yeah, I love the duty-free stores. Went to the duty-free store at the airport in Costa Rica before Caitie and I got on our flight to come home. And I got, for $55, 3 bottles of rum. That you can buy this rum in the States, but these 3 bottles of rum would have cost me total $130 here.
Wow.
And it's good stuff, too.
Yeah.
So, that was the Macallan 12-year double casked, and that was our final whiskey. So, any final thoughts on the passage or the booze?
Caitie, I like where you're going with the toxic masculinity. I just feel like there's a lot to be said about the vulnerability stuff, and especially as readers in 2018. I don't know if you want to say more about that, but I'm intrigued.
You know, it's interesting you say that because on NPR this past week they were talking about a woman who was a counselor with middle schoolers and worked with them middle school to high school. And when they first came in middle school, boys would talk about things like girls would. They would talk about their relationships and how their best friend was mad at them and, you know, all the things that girls were. But then there was a switch right at that age of the bar mitzvah, where the boys all of a sudden stopped talking about that. And it was just, the straight to the facts, no emotional things. So I think, we still get a lot of that today. Yeah. Of where that certain idea of masculinity comes out, and whether or not you're teaching it to your children, they're always seeing it.
Yeah, I feel like I think about this so much because of how toxic masculinity impacts what I do. I mean, you could argue that it is the root cause of why my job exists. Yeah.
Oh, sure.
And I see how hard it is to undo the impact, because some people might critique this conversation and say it's overly intellectual, but the conversations we have roots in real life, and it's not just about vulnerability. It's a bit like toxic masculinity leads to violence. Thinking that you know everything makes you more likely to hurt others, whether that's emotional hurt or physical hurt. Like the feeling that you have the patent on what truth is. All of that plays a role in domestic violence.
I'm writing that down for my sermon.
Okay, all right.
I'll give you the credit.
As quoted by Caitie. The other Caitie.
No, I think about it a lot, and I feel like sometimes I work with a lot of people who have been victims of domestic violence, and I'm not. That's not been my experience, but I feel like that's the reason why I do what I do, is because I'm so passionate about gender and gender equality, equality between the sexes, and women being empowered, and that's where I get my fire from.
Sure.
So
that's awesome.
Yep.
So I did speak.
You
Look
did.
At that.
And it was profound.
It was. And if you're wondering out there who the other two voices that popped up throughout the conversation were, John is John Callaway, who is Caitie's husband, and the other is Lindsey Jordan, Ted's fiancée. Thank you both for chiming in, too, because it really did contribute quite a bit to the conversation. We appreciate it. So, any other thoughts?
I'll be expecting my royalties in the mail, Jimmy.
Well, that's going to be, I'll give you a huge percentage of nothing.
Yeah.
Because that's what we make off of this.
Jimmy, where are you getting advertisements on this? Come on, Mac Weldon's advertising in Squarespace on every podcast in the world.
I just gave free advertising to Crown Royal, Bar and Whiskey, Suntory, Michter's, and the Macallan. So
you should contact them. Say, hey,
Yeah.
how about you sponsor?
yeah, I don't think that's going to happen. But hey, if we go record at that vineyard up in Elkin,
Yeah.
you never know.
It might be fun.
All right, so time to talk about what we're enjoying in pop culture. Who wants to go first?
Culture.
Yes,
Culture.
Ted didn't tell me about this.
this is how we end
Listen to
the
the podcast.
This is how we end each episode. Is everybody plugs something that they're enjoying in pop culture, or say
I will
plugs a
tell you.
Kickstarter project that they've been working on.
I will tell you, I love the fact that more minorities are getting mainstream screening in movies. And I know that's random, and it's probably a couple weeks old, but we went to see Crazy Rich Asians. We went to see Black Klansman. What else have we seen recently?
Sorry to bother you.
Sorry to Bother You. Like, all of these wonderful movies that, we go in, the advertising is not geared towards us, being white individuals, but we're sitting in there with everybody, and, we're enjoying it. So I really wish that we can have more of this. Like, just different cultures, different experiences, different races on the mainstream, getting playtime, and everybody getting their thoughts out there in a way, that's productive and receptive for audiences.
And a sequel to Crazy Rich Asians, because that was
So excited.
amazing.
There are 2 more books.
I know.
Yeah, no, it's gonna be
Crazier,
exciting.
Richer.
Jimmy read the
Asians.
book.
I did in fact read Crazy Rich Asians. I took several books to Costa Rica with me, thinking it would be enough. Nope.
Nope.
So Caitie had Crazy Rich Asians with her, and I started reading that, and it was actually a pretty good book.
And it's a great movie if you haven't seen it yet.
I have not seen the movie yet. I haven't had time for movies since we got back. So, movies with minority representation, absolutely. And this has been a great year for that. Going back to Black Panther in February, and the huge impact that had at the box office.
Yeah.
And then they killed him in Infinity War. Spoilers.
Well, they killed a lot of people in Infinity War. Spoilers.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Some of us have children that prevent us from seeing things until
Infinity
3 years
War
later.
has been on DVD for a month.
Jimmy, you better not spoil the ending to Thor 2 because they haven't seen that either.
I don't remember. I don't remember the ending of Thor 2, bruh.
They have a lot of catch up to do.
He throws a hammer.
There is much hammer throwing in Thor 2. You're correct.
One could call it hammer time.
Stop. Hammer time. Ted.
Okay, so I'm going to plug I can't even remember if we were recording the podcast, but The Good Place.
Yes, we were recording the podcast.
Okay,
when
so
we were talking about
go
The
watch
Good
that.
Place.
First,
Is it back on yet?
the first, the new season's going to premiere
that's
soon.
mine.
Damn it.
The new season's about to premiere. The last 2 seasons are on Netflix, so you have no excuse because I assume everyone has Netflix at this point. Or someone's login to Netflix. You can probably just Google it and people have put their logins on the internet. Let's see. A podcast I've been liking a lot recently is Do Go On, which is essentially 3 comedians. One does a report and the other 2 try and sidetrack the conversation. It's really good and it's a lot of fun. And then the YouTube show I've been watching a lot of the Lindsay doesn't like, but I think is hilarious.
Game.
Yep, Gamey
I like their
Game.
accents. They're Australian.
It's an Australian game show, Gamey Game, where the host Evan tries to talk about video games, and he gets 3 of his comedian pals that immediately derail it into side conversations and hilarious jokes and antics, and it's cool. It's really funny. But like everything in YouTube, because some of the episodes go like 45 minutes, like everything in YouTube, if you're done watching it, just stop. Like,
fair enough.
I feel like that with everything I watch on YouTube. It's like, oh, next one.
All right, who's going next? Caitie with a C or Caitie with a K?
He just cut you off, Ted.
That's the band playing over my acceptance speech.
Sorry, that's my bad. I didn't mean to cut you off. I really thought you were done. Were you not done?
He's done.
I've got some more.
Do you need to thank your parents?
It's a good internet show. Thank you.
All right, there we go. So, Caitie with the C or Caitie with the K? Caitie who I'm married to or Caitie who I'm not married to?
Not.
Okay.
I'm going to steal Making It before you go.
It's okay, I have another one.
Okay, good. Because Making It is the Great British Baking Show meets Parks and Rec.
Yes, it is.
It's the greatest. For She Who Cannot Craft, it is really wonderful. Because I live my dreams through these people.
Mm-hmm.
Is that on? What is that on?
Netflix.
Well, Hulu, but it's an NBC show.
There's another Netflix version of that. I think that's
Great
on.
British Baking Show.
No, it's a Netflix exclusive. Nailed
it. Yeah.
Nailed it.
It's actually just about baking.
So yeah, and the people on Making
And about
It
not
are
doing it well.
actually Making It. The people on there are actually talented at what they
And
do.
when Nick Offerman cracks himself up and giggles.
Just like that.
Just like that. It's just like that. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, no. So Caitie and I didn't leave the house much last weekend because, apparently the apocalypse was coming.
But it was sunny outside.
So we just stayed in and watched all of Making It.
Oh, man. It's so good. We just started watching it. The only time we have to watch TV these days is the 5 minutes between when we lay down and fall asleep. And so I'm talking from personal experience here. And so I watch it 5 minutes at a time, which is really good. 5 minutes at a time.
So I've watched the show. It's actually great.
So John, over in the corner, what do you want to plug?
I will plug, not to be self-serving, I will plug Kickstarter. I've been exploring Kickstarter as a website, and you can go along and look at all kinds of different projects, and there's everything from large art collections that people are trying to put together. It's amazing. Really go check out Kickstarter and look at something you can help out an artist, a struggling artist, or somebody that's trying to put together something new, and it can be a beautiful thing. So that's my plug. It's Kickstarter.
Are you a struggling artist?
No, I'm not a struggling artist.
You're just struggling.
I'm just struggling. Anyway, Kickstarter's a good thing.
All right, Kickstarter. I love Kickstarter. How many games have I got backed on Kickstarter?
Too many to name.
It's not too many.
Oh, that weird octagon one.
The Cones of Dunshire?
I did not back the Cones of Dunshire. If I ever saw the Cones of Dunshire on Kickstarter, I probably
Can we
would.
just have a moment for how appropriate that Parks and Rec reference was?
Oh, extremely.
It was
very
brilliant.
nice. Very nicely done.
I mean,
That was nicely done.
Pat on the back.
Caitie, who I'm married to.
I'm only 20 pages in, but I'm going to plug Liberal Redneck Manifesto. What is Trey's last name?
Trey Crowder.
Trey Crowder, written by Trey Crowder and his two partners. You can look up Trey on YouTube and find his Liberal Redneck videos.
Yeah,
he
he's
tours.
literally called the Liberal Redneck on YouTube and Facebook.
Yeah. So he, if you saw him on the street, if you heard him speak, you'd immediately pigeonhole him and think that he is one thing when he is totally not what you think he is. But he's a progressive with a Southern redneck twang.
He's a liberal atheist Southerner is what he is.
He is, and he's hilarious. And they put out this book's 2 years old.
It was published right before the 2016 presidential election. The version I bought has a foreword that was written after the election.
Right. But I'm only 20 pages in, but he's really making an argument that you don't have to give up your redneck culture, your redneck ways, but you can let go of some of the harmful politics. But he's doing it with humor.
Absolutely. Yep.
Can I? I'm sorry,
Sure.
I forgot I had one more plug.
You did
So our youth. I work I'm the youth director at PCUCC. Our youth program has expanded so much we're actually looking to hire an assistant youth director. And since this podcast goes out to pretty much all divinity students, if you are looking for a part-time job as a youth assistant youth director, go ahead and
work will be done.
we're all your. I'm planning all the stuff. You just have to teach the kids. So if you love kids, go ahead and send your resume or just get in contact with me at peaceuccyouthdirector@gmail.com. If you're wondering how much you'll get paid and what the benefits are, I don't know because the church hasn't really approved this yet. This is just an idea that we've thrown out.
Great!
But knowing how slowly churches go, if you email me, by the time you email me, hopefully this will be in motion and we'll be able to sit there. So if you're looking for a part-time job, as I'm sure all ministers are, and I'm sure you're free on Sunday mornings.
Jimmy, I think you just found your ad base. You can get all of the churches and ministers to advertise for their job openings.
and we can also advertise for professors and tell students what to do in the classes.
There you go.
Like read your syllabus in Neil Walls' class.
Well, I think we already covered that. So, I have my plugs are a couple things that happened over the last couple days that really have me very happy. Yesterday, a new Mumford & Sons single dropped. The first new one since 2012 when Babel came out, along with 2015 when Wilder Mind came out, along with the announcement that on November 16th they have a new album coming out called Delta. And this new song, Guiding Light, still has the very produced, almost Coldplay-esque sound that Wilder Mind had, but they brought some of the bluegrass elements back. Banjo is actually featured in this song, which was completely missing from Wilder Mind, and really to the detriment of that record, in my opinion. And then, today, Switchfoot put a video on YouTube narrated by John Foreman where he's basically saying, we've enjoyed taking a year off, but we're bored. And it ends to be continued October 19th. And I'm not sure what that means. If it means a new album's coming out, a new single, a new tour, or just an announcement on October 19th. But in 2 days' time, that was Mumford & Sons and Switchfoot, two of my favorite bands, both saying, hey, we've got new shit coming.
Speaking of good music, Shaggy and Sting came out with some new music.
I'm not sure. As in, it wasn't me, Shaggy?
Yes.
Is it
Together.
that song?
Y'all.
I mean, with Sting, that would seem appropriate.
Change your life kind of music. It's good. I'm telling you, you don't want to miss it. Shaggy and Sting.
That is the last combination I ever expected to hear. Well, actually, I don't know. Maybe like Ted Nugent and Jay-Z would be a more unexpected combination.
That would be unexpected.
Yeah.
It's crazy enough to work.
So anyway,
Jay-Z would kill Ted Nugent.
They don't have to be in the same room. They just need to record different things and they'll put them together.
So this has been fun. Mm-hmm. We should do this more often.
I agree.
Don't you do this weekly?
I do the podcast every other week. I'm talking like get a bunch of people in one room with liquor.
Agreed.
And talk about Jesus.
On a Friday night when we don't have to wake up and work the next day.
Amen to that.
I may or may not be waking up to go do a bike ride in the morning. I haven't decided yet.
Well, that's your poor life decision, but the rest of us don't have to suffer, although Caitie and I do have to get up and take care of
Your fur baby.
Our fur baby, no, our yard.
Oh.
Albus will sleep or he'll leave us alone as long as we want to sleep on Saturday morning. But our yard it's rough.
If you lived here in High Point, you get a citation.
It's not that rough.
Like for the grass being too high. That week that we had like 2 weeks of rain, I kept telling Ted, I have a feeling they're going to start citing people. And some of our neighbors started getting cited.
Really?
I was like, we've got to move on.
Yeah.
That's what that notice was.
Yeah, the little white notice. Yeah, the one you threw
So
away.
I take great offense to stuff like that because I am the caretaker of our lawn.
No, your lawn is good.
Yeah.
But High Point's very particular.
It's more for houses like one in our neighborhood that is for sale, and clearly whoever owns it has not been by in a month, and the grass is like above your knee.
That's
could
problematic.
hide small children, and nobody would know.
Yeah, exactly.
Our lawnmower is currently at the lawnmower doctor, and they said it could be 2 to 3 weeks. And then we called today, it's been 2 weeks. They said we got behind because of the hurricane.
You don't need to borrow a lawnmower?
We borrowed our neighbors.
That's it's probably for the best. You don't want that citation. So
No, you don't, because then you get on their radar, they keep coming around.
you don't want to be on the city of High Point's radar.
You don't. It's bad times.
Hey-o.
Well, this has been fun. So until next time, this has been Libations and Lectionaries. Read your Bible. Have a drink.
All day permanent bread, the glaze on my eyes.
Libations and Lectionaries is recorded and edited using Audacity open source audio editing software. Clips from Metallica's Whiskey in the Jar and Mumford & Sons' Guiding Light are used under fair use guidelines for the purpose of offering commentary. Thanks again to John Callaway, Caitie Schlimmer Callaway, Lindsey Jordan, Ted Wilkinson, and Katie Smith for joining me for this episode. We'll see you next time.
I guess